By 1944, the German army was running out of almost everything it had started the war with. The panzer divisions that once spearheaded lightning offensives were worn down to a handful of serviceable vehicles. New Allied and Soviet tanks were tougher, more numerous, and backed by overwhelming artillery and air power. On many sectors of the front, the only thing standing between those tanks and the next village was a thin line of tired infantry. Berlin could not magically conjure up more Panthers and Tigers for every threatened road. What it could do was send something else: crates of cheap, disposable anti-tank weapons, simple tubes preloaded with hollow charges that even a half-trained conscript could fire. If Germany couldn't meet armor with armor, it would try to meet it with men in the rubble, each carrying a single brutal shot. They called it the Panzerfaust. In this episode, we look back at how a late-war panic inside the collapsing Third Reich gave birth to one of the most widely issued anti-tank weapons of the Second World War. A weapon so simple and cheap that almost any infantryman could use it, and so dangerous that it forced tank crews to change the way they fought. This is the story of how Germany tried to arm every infantryman to kill a tank. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, its armored forces and anti-tank guns still largely dominated. Early Soviet tanks and older designs could be handled by 37mm and 50mm guns, and by the armored spearheads that had worked so well in Poland and France. That comfort did not last. New Soviet designs appeared: the T-34 with its sloped armor and wide tracks, and the heavy KV-1 with thick plates that shrugged off light guns. These machines weren't invincible, an 88mm field gun could deal with them, but for lighter infantry weapons they were tough, often frustrating targets. German gunners often had to close to short range or hit from the flank. For the ordinary infantryman, the problem was worse. His personal anti-tank tools suddenly felt obsolete. Anti-tank rifles that could punch through early light tanks were now almost useless. Magnetic mines and satchel charges demanded insane bravery. You had to run right up to a moving tank under fire. Towed anti-tank guns remained effective but were heavy, few in number, and easy to lose in retreats. By 1943, more and more German units were fighting on the defensive, often with fewer tanks and fewer heavy guns. They faced enemies bringing more armor to the battlefield, not less. Again and again, tanks broke through, and the men left to hold the line had nothing in their hands that could reliably stop them. Commanders and engineers needed something brutal and simple, a weapon almost any soldier could use after a short demonstration, light enough to carry, cheap enough to mass produce, and powerful enough to punch through the side armor of a T-34 or a Sherman at close range. The answer came from a different way of using explosives: the shaped charge. Traditional armor-piercing shells relied on mass and speed. You needed a big gun and high velocity to smash your way through armor. Long barrels, strong breech mechanisms, complex machining. A shaped charge turned that logic upside down. Inside the explosive sat a conical cavity lined with metal, usually copper. When the explosive detonated, the shock wave collapsed that cone into a narrow, extremely fast jet of metal. Focused on a small area, this jet could burn through armor far thicker than the diameter of the warhead itself. Velocity from a gun barrel suddenly mattered much less. What mattered was the design of the warhead and the distance at which it detonated. German designers realized that if they mounted a large shaped charge warhead on the front of a simple tube and ensured the right standoff distance, even a slow projectile could become a tank killer. The launcher did not need to be elegant or long-lived. It only had to work once. That idea led directly to the Panzerfaust, a disposable, recoilless launcher preloaded at the factory with a big hollow charge warhead, fired by a simple propellant charge. The soldier received it ready to use. He fired it and then threw the empty tube away. The first combat versions appeared around 1943. They looked almost comical. a thin metal tube with a huge bulbous warhead on the front, like a steel hammer with the handle hollowed out. This early family, often grouped under the name Panzerfaust 30, followed a simple pattern. Inside the tube, a shaft held the warhead. At the rear, a propellant charge sat behind it. On top, a crude flip-up sight gave the user at least some reference for aiming. On the side, big letters warned about the dangerous backblast. The 30 referred to the approximate effective range, around 30 meters. That number told its own story. To use it, a soldier had to let a tank come almost on top of him. He had to expose himself long enough to line up a side or rear shot and hope the crew or accompanying infantry did not spot him first. But if he managed it, the results were frightening. The shaped charge could punch through the side armor of most medium tanks. A solid hit could shower the interior with fragments and flame. Even when the tank did not explode, the crew might be wounded, stunned, or shocked into bailing out. For German commanders, it made brutal sense. They could issue these weapons in bulk. They did not have to commit scarce anti-tank guns to every threatened sector. A short training session and one man with a Panzerfaust might change the outcome of a skirmish. Frontline reports, however, made one thing very clear: 30 meters was extremely close. Many Panzerfaust users died getting into position or after firing, cut down by machine gun bursts or crushed when they were spotted too late. In urban fighting, rubble and narrow streets helped a bit, but even there, the short range forced men into risky positions. Designers pushed for improvements. The Panzerfaust 60 became the next major step. By adjusting the propellant charge, tube, and sights, they doubled the nominal effective range to around 60 meters. It was still a close-range weapon, but it gave the shooter a little more space and a slightly better chance of surviving. Later versions, like the Panzerfaust 100, tried to push this further. On paper, they extended effective range again. In practice, accuracy at long range was never great. Wind, smoke, fear, bad posture, all of these ruined shots. But the basic warhead remained dangerous enough that any good hit on a flank or rear was bad news for a tank. Through all of this, Germany's situation worsened. By 1944 and 1945, the Reich could no longer replace tanks and heavy guns as fast as it lost them. Tank battalions shrank to a handful of vehicles. Some divisions fought with only a few assault guns as their armored support. Towed anti-tank guns were knocked out or abandoned. What Germany still had was the ability to stamp out simple tubes and warheads in large numbers, at least for a while. The Panzerfaust fit this collapsing war economy. It did not demand precision-machined breech blocks or long, rifled barrels. The sight was folded sheet metal. The warhead was pressed steel, explosive, and a fuse that could be built quickly. Factories and small workshops across the Reich turned out Panzerfausts by the crate. As bombing disrupted one plant, production shifted to others. Millions of launchers left assembly lines in the last 2 years of the war. They went to frontline infantry, to Volksgrenadier units, to ad hoc battle groups, and increasingly to Volkssturm and Hitler Youth formations told to defend towns and cities. In theory, every road into Germany could now be a Panzerfaust trap. Every hedgerow, forest track, and city block might conceal a one-shot tank killer. Manuals drew a neat picture of how this should work. Small Panzerfaust teams would choose narrow points in the terrain: bridges, choke points, street corners. They would dig in or hide in cellars and upper floors, wait until tanks came into range, fire at flanks and rears, then slip away before the inevitable retaliation. Reality, especially by late 1944 and 1945, was much messier. Many of the men holding Panzerfausts were not seasoned infantry. They were older reservists, half-trained Volksgrenadiers, or boys barely 16. Some received only a brief street corner demonstration. This is how you flip the sight, this is how you hold the tube, this is where you must not stand when it fires. under artillery fire and in rubble, neat doctrine broke down. Some men fired too early, at the wrong angle, or straight at the thick frontal armor because fear took over. Others misjudged distance and saw the warhead bury itself short of the target. Gunners leaned out too far and were cut down by machine gun bursts. Backblast injured comrades or gave away positions in an instant. Yet there were also countless moments when the Panzerfaust did exactly what it was meant to do. In ruined streets, Panzerfaust teams waited in basements and behind collapsed walls. Soviet or Allied tanks edged forward, commanders scanning broken windows. A quick silhouette at ground level, a flash, and the lead tank lurched to a halt, blocking the road for those behind. In such moments, a weapon that cost a tiny fraction of a tank delayed entire columns, forced them to bring up engineers and infantry, and bought time for defenders to fall back or for other positions to prepare. From the other side of the gun sight, tank crews learned to respect this threat quickly. Reports from 1944 and 1945 told a similar story. In open country with good visibility, tanks still dominated when supported properly. But as soon as they approached villages, forests, or city outskirts, the danger changed. Tank commanders feared short-range hollow-charge weapons most exactly where they needed tanks the most. They adapted. Infantry moved ahead on foot, trying to clear ditches and houses. Tanks hung back slightly, supporting with main guns instead of charging alone. Artillery pounded suspected ambush points. Sometimes buildings were reduced simply because they offered too many hiding places. Even when a Panzerfaust only blew off tracks or damaged running gear, the effect could be decisive. An immobilized tank blocked a road and became a magnet for fire. Crews often abandoned crippled vehicles under pressure, leaving them behind as wrecks or salvage projects. Historians still struggle to give a precise number of tanks destroyed by Panzerfausts alone. German reports late in the war often credited them with dramatic tallies that are hard to verify. Allied and Soviet records usually grouped hits under broader labels like hollow-charge weapons alongside Panzerschrecks and other causes. What the record does show is a clear pattern. Across the whole war, guns, mines, and mechanical failures remained the main killers of tanks. But in the last years of fighting, especially in built-up areas and complex terrain, infantry carried hollow-charge weapons like the Panzerfaust became a significant and feared cause of losses. For many German infantrymen defending a village or a city block in 1944 or 1945, the Panzerfaust was the only serious anti-tank weapon within reach. The Panzerfaust was a child of desperation. It emerged because a nation that once relied on fast armored thrusts now fought losing battles in its own streets. It armed soldiers, civilians, and children with a weapon that brought the struggle with tanks down to a few tens of meters, to cellars, ditches, and shattered doorways. It did not save the Reich. Overwhelming Allied and Soviet industry, manpower, and logistics decided the war. No stack of disposable tubes could change that. But the Panzerfaust left a long shadow. It proved that a cheap, simple launcher with a shape-charge warhead could give even a lightly trained infantryman a real chance against modern armor at close range. After 1945, every major army studied that lesson. Post-war rocket-propelled grenades and disposable anti-tank launchers refined the idea, but the basic logic remained. A soldier in a ditch or in a ruined house would never match a tank's firepower or protection. But with the right weapon on his shoulder, he could make the tank crew afraid. In the story of armored warfare, the Panzerfaust marked the moment when tanks stopped being purely the hunters and became, in certain places, the hunted as well, all beginning with that muffled thump in the rubble and a cheap tube in a single man's hands deciding the fate of a very expensive machine.